Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor, and for today's video I am going to be going over all of the books that I read in August. So in the month of August, I actually read 7 books, and I am working my way through 2 more that I just didn't finish in time to include them in this wrap-up, but I will briefly mention them just because I do think I'm going to really enjoy both of those books that I'm currently making my way through. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I'm working my way through that I didn't technically finish in the month of August is 20th Century Ghosts by Joe Hill. This is, I believe, his first short story collection and possibly the first thing that he published. Don't remember, but it is very early in his work, and I am really enjoying this one. I'd say I've probably read about 2/5 of this book so far. It just takes me a while to get through short story collections, so I am enjoying it. I don't know if this will be my favorite short story collection that Joe Hill has ever done, but I am really enjoying it so far. And then the next book that I am making my way through is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I have just reached like the halfway point in this one, and I can tell that this is probably going to be one of my favorite Stephen King books. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. I think it's generally regarded as one of his best books, and for good reason. This one's just going to be a hard hitter. This book is very triggering to me for a lot of reasons, which is why I've never actually tried to complete it before now, but I am very much looking forward to finishing this one and finally being able to say that I've read Pet Sematary because it's one of King's most iconic works, and I do think it's probably going to be in my top 10 at least of Stephen King works. So that's exciting. Looking forward to finishing that up in September. And now moving on to the books that I finished in the month of August. The first one is Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito. I enjoyed this one. It's probably not my favorite of Junji Ito's works that I have read. This is a short story collection. It's being marketed as a best of collection, but most of the stories in this are brand new. This was an enjoyable read, fairly short read. It is a shorter collection and it is manga, so I tend to go through those faster than a traditional novel. I did read this through NetGalley's ARCs program, and it did just come out in August, so if you are looking for something to pick up in September or October, this collection would probably be a good starting point for Junji Ito because his trademark traditional style is there, but I wouldn't say it's as graphically disturbing as other things I've read by him. So if you're looking to kind of dip your toe into the water but aren't ready for like the most horrific things he's ever drawn, that being said, this is still very graphic, pretty horrific, but this would probably be a good jumping off place to start. The next book that I'm going to be talking about today is The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is the prequel 5-novella bind-up that is the start of the Throne of Glass series, depending on how you read it. This is my first time reading this book, first time reading the whole series this year. I did enjoy this. Like I mentioned before in this video, I'm not one for a lot of short story collections. I just prefer longer story formats, but this one did feel pretty cohesive. If you look at the short stories as longer chapters, they are all pretty much within the same span of time, so it does feel like just a book as opposed to separate novellas, so this was pretty enjoyable. I would honestly, as someone who is reading the series for the first time, probably recommend that you read this one actually before you read Throne of Glass, which is the first book in the series. So I think it gives you a lot of background information into Selena's character that I think you'll better appreciate her as a character in Throne of Glass knowing what she's gone through to get to that point. Do want to mention this really fast. I am going through them based on like my least favorite book of the month to my favorite book of the month. So they are in chronological order because we're getting into some summerween reads, and those are books that I've read very, very recently. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because I did discuss them at length in my summerween vlogs, so if you want to see those, I'll leave a link down below to watch those. But the next book I'm going to talk about about is Killcreek by Scott Thomas, and this is a haunted house story about a group of horror writers who are invited to spend a night at a very infamous haunted house. They all have their own reasons for going and doing sort of this interview with a really popular web zine editor. None of them believe in ghosts, that is, until they all step foot inside this house. I do think this is a very enjoyable haunted house story. It is very lengthy, but it didn't feel like a big book. It's definitely a fast-paced read. The biggest downfall for me were just I really didn't enjoy any of the characters, and for me, characters are such a big pull for me in stories. I'm a character-driven reader, so not really caring about any of the characters and not really caring if they lived or died or how the outcome of the book was, just in terms of that, hindered my enjoyment of the story, but I did think it was a very cleverly done haunted house tale. The next book was a summerween read as well, and that is Dracula by Dacre Stoker and J.D. Barker. This is a very enjoyable vampire story, and it is also an origin story of Bram Stoker, who Dacre Stoker is related to, which is really neat, but is the story of Bram Stoker and his childhood and his young adulthood, and how certain events in his life led to him discovering vampires and him getting inspiration for writing Dracula. This was really enjoyable. I wouldn't really recommend you read this if you haven't read Dracula, because I think a lot of my enjoyment came from kind of getting those little Easter eggs and backstories about the book Dracula. So it definitely feels like a prequel of sorts to that book. So I don't think I'd recommend you pick this up if you haven't read that book, but I thought this was a lot of fun. It's not my favorite vampire tale out there, but it is an enjoyable, fun period piece about vampires, and honestly, with these months coming up, can you ask for anything better than that? I enjoyed reading this one. The next book that I read this month is Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second full-length novel in the Throne of Glass series, so I can't give too much about it, but I did enjoy this one. It is really fun to see with each book in this series how Sarah J. Maas's writing style really improves, and each of the characters are kind of growing into their own, so that's really fun. I did enjoy this probably more than the first one, but spoilers for my reading in September, I have started Heir of Fire, and I'm 100 pages in and I'm already enjoying that one more than the previous two volumes, so this isn't going to be a favorite of the series, I don't think, especially because there are some things in here that I just wasn't excited about happening. But overall, this was very enjoyable. It obviously made me race to pick up the next installation in the series, and I really enjoyed the big reveal at the end of this. I do think it was a little bit predictable, especially if you've been on BookTube. People kind of accidentally drop spoilers and hints about things in the series just because this has come out, I think, in 2014 now, so a while ago, but I really had a great time reading this. My biggest complaint for this book is that there's a character named Archer, and I couldn't picture anyone but Archer from the TV show Archer, so that just was a mind bend, even though I know they look nothing similar. They're not even the same character at all, but I couldn't get that out of my head, so that was a little annoying. But other than that, pretty good installation in the series. The next book I also read for the Summerween readathon. I cannot state enough how much I enjoyed that readathon this month, because it really introduced me to a lot of good books that have been on my TBR for a while. I just never gotten around to reading them. Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill is one of these. I really enjoyed this. This is about a former rock star who's more than a little bit jaded and probably not the nicest person. He purchases a ghost on an online auction and receives this ghost and starts getting haunted. This is a ghost story that starts right off the bat being about a haunting, and creepy things start happening as soon as like the second and third chapters in this book. This also turns into sort of a paranormal thriller murder mystery. There's high stakes the entire time. I love it. I mean, Joe Hill cannot steer me wrong. I really enjoyed this one. If you like morally gray main characters and ghosts that are definitely ghosts and they're not just, you know, is this person seeing things or are there actually ghosts? If you enjoy that in a ghost story, I think you'll really love this one. I didn't know a lot about it going into it, and I'd suggest as well that you don't read too much into it, because I think the realizations and kind of plot twists along the way are so spectacularly done that this does feel like a very good blend between a thriller and a horror book. And then my favorite favorite book that I read this month was The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This is a sci-fi standalone murder mystery thriller, which is a lot of really cool concepts in one book. It's very small. I really binged this in pretty much one sitting. I think this would make a spectacular movie. This was really good and probably going to be on a list of my favorite books of the year, which is really exciting. If you are intimidated by sci-fi, I definitely don't think you need to be with this book. This feels very much like there are sci-fi elements, but the main focus of the story is a lot more almost like a contemporary thriller sort of feel. There are some sci-fi elements in here, of course, obviously, but if you don't normally read sci-fi, I think this is very accessible. So I'm just going to read the dust jacket for this one because there's a lot going on and I don't want to give too much because this one is also one I think you should go in knowing not a lot about it because it is a wild ride. So this book is about multiverse travel because it is finally possible. There's just one catch. No one can visit a world where their counterpart is still alive. Enter Kara, whose parallel selves happen to be exceptionally good at dying. Kara's life has been cut short on 372 worlds in total. The Space Between Worlds is about an outsider who can travel between worlds and discovers a secret that threatens her new home and her fragile place within it. This is a cross-dimensional adventure and a powerful examination of identity, privilege, and belonging. So I highly enjoyed reading this one. I'm really looking forward to see what else this author comes out with because this is her debut, which is astounding because this is pretty much a near perfect book. I enjoyed the characters. Kara is just this wonderfully scrappy woman who has not been given the best lot in life, but she is determined to make something better of herself and to raise herself up from the bootstraps, even though society doesn't allow for certain people to do that. This takes place in, I believe, our world, but a distant future of our world, depending on what parallel world that we are in, right? There's sapphic representation in here. The book itself is wonderfully diverse. I really enjoyed this one and I'm waiting for this to be a movie, honestly, because the way this is written, even concepts where we don't have an equivalent of it on Earth, you can picture it in your head so clearly. So I really enjoyed reading this book and I'm really glad that I picked it up pretty much on a whim one night and then just completely fell in love with it. So those are all of the books that I read this month. I think this might be my shortest wrap up yet, so that's always fun for me to edit because normally there's like almost an hour of footage and I have to condense it down into something that's like 30 to 40 minutes. I think this will be shorter, so that's nice. It wasn't the best reading month for me in terms of amount of books that I've read, but honestly, even like my lowest book this month was a very high rating for me, so that was good to see. Quality over quantity every time. I'm really looking forward to September. I'm not doing a set TBR just because my brain does not work like that, but there are so many new releases coming out in September that I'm excited to read. So I have a feeling that I'm going to have a lot of wonderful books to talk about in my September wrap up. That concludes this video though. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe for more content from me. Stay safe, stay well, and I am so happy you're here. Thanks so much for watching and I will catch y'all in the next video. Bye!